Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is a continuation of my last talk on Zakat, not as an academic subject, but as a long and enduring issue of short guidance on Zakat through successive generations with no end in sight. So the status quo continues. In the meantime, we who are not paying Zakat and will not be paying Zakat will keep on worrying about the consequences in this world and much more after death. In the last talk on Zakat, I discussed a number of aspects of Zakat with reference to fiqh ruling. The fiqh ruling on Zakat as it stands now and as it has always stood so, in fact, nullifies the Zakat as in effect, nullifies in effect, in spirit, and even in essence. It makes the obligation of Zakat as non-functional, non-practical, and non-compliable, denying the poor their dues of Zakat when the poor are all around and the poverty deepening and widening all along. The whole purpose, the divine purpose for Zakat would seem to be defeated. I intend in this session to cover three issues, all pertinent to Zakat. One is calculation of Zakat and distribution of Zakat. Another is wealth as a test when many fail in the test. In fact, not paying Zakat is an evidence of a failure of the test of wealth. And the third issue is the awakening, at last, the awakening upon death. I will try to show how we fail in the test of wealth by letting the Quran itself speak about it. And as for the awakening at the death, at the time of death, upon death, I will draw a scenario also of what the pang and the stupor, Sakaratul Maut, is all about. Some 3 years ago, I wrote and published a book on Zakat. The title of the book is Make Your Choice Now. The word now is meant to say before death overtakes you. You have to make a choice whether you would like to secure salvation of soul or suffer a damnation of soul, whether you would like to start paying Zakat or the status quo would continue. There will be a link provided to the PDF of this book, because much more is in the book. This booklet is of 40 pages, and anybody who is a keen reader worrying about Zakat can finish this book through in 55 minutes. Incidentally, in this book, on page 25, it will be noticed that I invited any scholar of whatever rank having differing views and arguments to respond to me by confining himself to the text of the Quran, to ahadith agreeing with the Quran, and the application of intellectual thinking and reasoning. No response has yet been received. The book explains calculation of zakat and the distribution of zakat. Now zakat, the rate is so small that we shall never find any tax in this world for whatever purpose as low as petty 2.5%. And besides, the principle on which zakat is calculated is very generous, and I'll explain. The asset like own family house, family cars, own used jewelry, any legitimate expense as a necessity of life is not included. That's one. Another thing, any asset that gives profit like rental building, industry, a fleet of trucks for transport business, farm, etc., are not included. What is included? What is covered in calculation? And I have in this book a template to show how to calculate the annual dues of zakat. What is zakatable is the cash, the bank accounts, stocks of trade, and receivables. And what is deducted from this is all legitimate debts which is to be paid. Even the debts and taxes on the assets which produce profit and income can be deducted from the cash if it has not yet been paid. Similarly, any investment made from one's own money for the rainy days, that investment is like cash or money in the bank's account. That has to be included for calculation of zakat. Now the distribution. The distribution of zakat has been described in the Quran in chapter 9, verse 60, and it goes in this order. We give zakat to poor, the one who does not have a provision in advance for his living for 1 year. He is called fakir in the verse of the Quran. But then there is another category of beneficiary who is called miskin. While the poor has no advance provision for his sustenance for the whole year, but the miskin is worrying about his daily meal. He is called miskin. He is a beneficiary for the distribution of zakat. Number 3, if any person committed a debt, a legitimate debt, hoping that he would be able to pay off, and he couldn't do without incurring debt, such a person, when fails to pay his debt, so he can be one of the beneficiaries of zakat money. Similarly, fi sabilillah, zakat money can be paid fi sabilillah to benefit the Muslim public, but then the priority has to be given to the people as a human touch. Unless if there are none around, then such a contribution can be paid fi sabilillah to any institution for the good of the Muslim public. And then the last one, according to the verse, any traveler who got stranded for lack of money to return to his home country or his hometown for reason that was beyond his control, he can also be helped to get the zakat money. In addition, a father can help his son if the father has money, has means but not enough to satisfy the need of the son, then he is allowed to dip into his zakat account. Similarly, it's vice versa. A son wanting to help his father, and he does help, but there may come a time when his personal means are limited on that occasion, and he has zakat money in balance, then he can also dip his hand into his zakat account and help the father. So it shows that priority is in favor of the relatives. However, there has to be a year end nominated because zakat is calculated annually. There has to be a fixed year end date, and as at that date, then one can establish what is his net worth according to the principle and the conditions that I have stated. At the same time, when one makes payment of zakat, niyat is very important, but the recipient, the beneficiary, need not know that what he gets is a zakat money, because people could be helped in many ways. There can be sadaqah, and that can be the zakat. There has to be niyat in advance. What is it, sadaqah or zakat? Now, for the beginners, let us take an example. I haven't paid zakat all in my life, and now with the awakening by the grace of Allah, I want to pay zakat. So I pay zakat for the current year. But what about the past zakat? Now, that doesn't mean that by paying the past zakat, which cannot be exactly accurate or precise, the sin is absolved. No, but that lies in the hands of Allah. At least Allah will know that here is my slave who for the first time has come up to wash his tazkiyah nafs, to purify his nafs. So for the beginner, he has to pay zakat on all the assets that he possesses. If those assets were created out of the profit he made in his business or in his professional career, that assets are the one which he got on which no zakat has been paid. So he may pay zakat on all those assets, but that will be only for the first time and not then successively for the subsequent years. Now I come to this wealth as a hard test. I personally believe that if Allah wants to give me a test, there are many ways to test me. But I would wish that while Allah does not make me dependent on my sustenance, but He should not give me wealth in excess of what I need, because that is a test. Many fail. One example which we don't need not evidence, we don't pay zakat. Non-paying zakat contributes to the failure of the test of wealth. And then Allah speaks about temptation of wealth. Let the Quran speak about the wealth as a test. For example, Allah forbids squandering of one's own legitimate wealth. And whoever does that, Allah terms him as the fellows of shaitan. That is chapter 17, verse 27. This is enough to give us a shiva that if we squander our own money for luxuries, example, when it is not necessary, and shaitan and Allah compares us with the fellows of shaitan, then how wrathful is Allah when a person who squanders the money which does not belong to him but belongs to the poor as dues of zakat, and he never paid it. It would mean such a person then is even closer to shaitan than as a fellow of shaitan. When Allah warns like in the chapter 102, verse 1 and 2, Alhaakumut takathur hatta zurtumul makabir. Abundance diverts you until you come to the graves. Now Allah's warning is not speculative. Wisdom is with him. The knowledge of unseen is with him. The knowledge of future is with him. When he warns that abundance diverts you until you come to the grave, it's enough to make somebody say, "Oh Allah, save me from wealth." Another very scaring warning in the Quran. It is chapter 104, verse 2 and 3. The one who piles up wealth and considers it a provision against mishap, he thinks that his wealth will make him last or live forever. Such a scaring is the test for wealth. And yet there are people whose whole their life is attuned to accumulating wealth only to leave it behind, taking with him the burden of accountability. And there is yet another verse in the Quran. It is chapter 100, verse 8. And I'm sure only 10 years ago, when I was at the age of 80 years, I had never studied the Quran from cover to cover and known what is there as a guidance, as a divine guidance, the age of 80. Imagine, even these chapters, even these verses that I'm saying, perhaps many will find that this is unnews to them. They would never have known that such a thing is in the Quran. Now this one says, and most surely man is tenacious in love for wealth. Now tell me, who would want a test for wealth when this life is a fleeting moment? And then, while we are still on the subject of Zakat, Allah says in chapter 2, verse 273, do not wait for the poor to come to your place and beg for help and bruise his pride. Don't. Allah says, go and seek out them and provide to them what is due to them. Now imagine that when we have to go and seek out the poor to whom zakat is due, instead we pocket their zakat, use it as our own money with impunity, as if there is no debt and there is no accountability, as if we have ceased to become that human being. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Astaghfirullah. Now there are still more verses, but I have no time. Time is limited. But instead, you will find these verses in the booklet whose link will be provided to you to read. Now let us come to the third subject pertinent to Zakat, the agony of death, Sakaratul Maut, the stupor of death, the awakening, but too late. It is upon death. And that is the reason our Holy Prophet said, Al-insanu niyamun wa izamatu yabhaku. Insan is asleep all the way through. But when he dies, he wakes up to the truth. Too late. It's just fait accompli. That is a process. However instantaneous or sudden it may be, still it undergoes a process that comes about in different degrees of intensity and extensity. That can be easy and simple, that can be otherwise. Now I will state the stage, how the process comes about of death and it ends in death. Even Hazrat Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam in Nahjul Balagha has mentioned about the agony of death and how the remorse comes about when the person who has created wealth and finds that his soul is between life and death and finds that the whole thing was a big mistake. Now what happens is this, that process, simple and short or otherwise, is on individual basis. It is said that death involves removing the soul from the body, it is like a surgery. And that is what Mufassirin says, it is Sakaratul Maut. And Allah has said, Kullu nafsin zaikatul maut, every soul shall taste death. The mere word used, taste, it means it could be bitter. It could be more bitter if not sweet. Now, a person becomes sick and recovers. Becoming sick and recovering, going to the hospital and coming and discharged as a healthy person is a common thing, is a common experience for us. But there comes a time when the same person becomes ill and he is apprehensive for the first time about his life and about the impending death, as if he gets an alert to beware, get prepared. So what happens is this: the first sign of a person who is now undergoing a process of death without his knowledge, without his being aware, even his family not being aware, is he finds himself tired, discomfort. He is not enthusiastic, even if somebody talks to him about his business. Tiredness is a sign of detachment from now, from the world, from all that is around him. And then the next stage, he loses appetite. Even drinks he takes when he's only pressed to take. And the third stage, his speaking becomes less and less until entirely ceases. He drifts into short spells of sleep, on and off. And then comes the stage when he sinks into bouts of unconsciousness, and then comes round. And again, and then comes round. And then now the process of death now quickens. Having lost his voice when he needed most to warn the family members of what they should not do, what he did. That was the only best thing he could have done, is to tell them, but the voice is lost. And now he lays on the bed with body still and eyes half open, glassy and staring, but he is not aware of anything around him. After a short while, his breathing ceases, heart stops, and the soul vanishes. Ruhul Faniya, which the soul vanishes. He is no more relevant as a person. What is relevant is his body. Even that, after burial, becomes irrelevant. Essentially, that the scene of a deathbed ending in death is not uncommon to us. But whatever it may be, short and simple, the process, or not, that does not signify to us any particular fate of any soul vanished. That knowledge is only with Allah. If somebody took long in deathbed, doesn't mean that his fate is consistent with that. No, that knowledge is only with Allah. Now, in this book which I wrote and published, there is a poem which I composed. It may be of interest. O poor, how terrible is thy plight, when the rich from thee tax flight, as if there awaits no day of fright. When that day is kept no in sight, none but thine is the long fight, till the day thou get thy right. And with God always is the might, with records clear in black and white. Walaikum assalam.